Everything had to be inspected and cleaned afterward to avoid any contamination. But this was a huge milestone. With that done, JWST's fore and aft pallets were initially raised up, then the DTA tower was stowed and locked into place, and the pallets were finally closed and locked into place for the last time on Earth. On August 26, NASA announced that JWST was finally complete, tested, and stowed in its launch configuration. The next time it unfolds itself will be in space. Prior to its departure, the folded JWST was packed into the Space Telescope Transporter for Air, Road, and Sea, otherwise known as STARS. STARS is essentially a mobile clean room designed to protect Webb from rain, wind, humidity, temperature changes, and even vibrations during transport. Now, STARS was last used in 2018 when the optical half of Webb was shipped from the Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston to Northrop Grumman's High Bay in Redondo Beach. At the time, it barely fit into a C5 Galaxy. But after the optical telescope was mated to the Sunshield and spacecraft bus, STARS had to be made even larger to accommodate the completed spacecraft. Now this time, Webb could no longer fit into any aircraft. And even if it could, it was now too heavy to cross the 7 bridges between the Guyana airport and the launch site. So Webb was driven to Seal Beach, California, and loaded onto the MN Colibri. Even that was a careful exercise. Once STARS was loaded into the ship's cargo hold, additional trailers with pressurized air were hooked up to feed a continuous supply of pristine dry air into the transporter's interior. These precautions allowed STARS to keep the contamination level inside the container down to no more than 100 particles that were a half a micron in size or larger. Now for reference, a half a micron is just 1% of the width of a human hair. Talk about running a clean ship. Sorry. Now that Webb has docked, the next step is to drive it over to the launch complex and get it into the receiving room and prepare it for its December 18 launch. Now, the December 18 launch date is obviously later than the October 31st launch date that was previously announced. And yes, it's hard to keep track, there have been so many delays. But to recap, NASA announced in July of 2020 that the launch was going to be delayed from March to October 31st due to the pandemic. But also in 2020, the Ariane 5 launch vehicle experienced anomalous vibrations during fairing separation on both of its launches. I covered these problems in detail in a previous video, so I won't repeat them all here. But in June 2021, Arianespace announced that they had, in fact, fixed the vibration problem. Now, as far as I could tell, there are no official announcements as to what the exact cause of the vibrations were. But on July 30th of this year, Arianespace had a nominal Ariane 5 launch and deployment of its payloads. NASA and ESA agreed that the Ariane 5 was once again cleared to launch James Webb. However, Arianespace still has a second launch of the Ariane 5 to complete before they can launch Webb. And this launch will put a commercial communications and a French military communications satellite into geostationary orbit. This second launch is scheduled for October 22nd. So if all goes well with the next launch, Webb will have its turn about 2 months later. That will allow enough time to get Webb ready to go. Ground crews will unpack Webb from its STARS transporter and run a series of aliveness tests to make sure it weathered its journey okay. Then they'll attach Webb to the payload adapter that will eventually mount atop the Ariane 5. Webb will then be fueled with a witch's brew of toxic hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide propellants. This is the fuel that Webb's thrusters will use to keep it on course to L2 and eventually maintain its orbit. After it's fueled, Webb will be moved to the rocket assembly building, stacked atop the Ariane 5, and enclosed in its launch fairing. The assembled rocket will roll out to the pad 1 day before launch. Meanwhile, controllers at Webb's command center in Baltimore are doing a final launch readiness exercise. And this will be their 6th and final dress rehearsal, after which they'll have practiced every step of observatory deployment and commissioning. So yeah, there's still a lot of work left to do.
10 seconds
but
left.
Let's just take a moment to mark this milestone. Webb is completely built, and it's passed all of its deployment tests. It left California as an assembled observatory for the first time, and it's not coming back. Next stop is the launch pad, and then L2, 1.5 million kilometers from Earth. Along the way, there's going to be a very long and complex series of more than 150 deployments just to get Webb unfolded and ready for science. I'm going to discuss those deployments and how Webb works in an upcoming video. But for now, I thought it would just be cool to appreciate all the hard work that thousands of people have put in over so many years to get to this point. It's getting real, and Webb is gonna launch. I'd also like to take a moment to appreciate my patrons for helping to keep Launchpad Astronomy going. And I'd like to welcome Garrett Lummel, Bill Kerr, and Owen for becoming my newest sponsors. And if you'd like to keep up with Webb's next steps and everything else going on in the universe, well, please make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new videos. Until next time, stay curious, my friend.
For you, hermanita. Cutting their vision.
Scanning ahead.
Enemy spotted mid. Still in sight.
Healing over here.
Rest. Reloading.
Joke's over! You're dead!
Enemy spotted.
Enemy spotted A.
Last player standing.
Hawk out. Blinded. Hawk out.
Last round in the half.
Don't be cheap. Spend it all before it's gone. Need a drop. Need a drop.
Need a drop.
Ready. Need a drop. They will come.
There they are.
Spike planted.
Shot down.
Found one. Hawk out. Play tight.
Last player standing.
Joke's over! You're dead!
Switching
I know
sides.
what must be done.
Reloading.
It is approaching 9 a.m. as a London Underground train reaches the end of the line. However, instead of decelerating into Moorgate Station, the train makes no attempt to stop. To the astonishment of commuters waiting on the platform, the train speeds right past them and crashes horrifically into the overrun tunnel. The front carriages are crushed into the wall by the force of the trailing carriages. The overrun tunnel is now crammed with mangled metal, making the space a nightmare for the following 13 hours of rescue efforts. But an investigation revealed no faults or failures with the train or the track. So, what could have caused this crash? The answer lies with the driver. But as he was located at the very front of the train at the time of the crash, His strange actions that day will forever be a mystery to us. On the 28th of February 1975, 56-year-old motorman Leslie Newson is preparing for a day of driving trains on the Northern Line of the London Underground in the UK. His work begins at 7 a.m, driving a 6-carriage train from Drayton Park Station to Moorgate, just 2 miles away. He will make numerous trips throughout the course of his day. By 8:40 a.m, he is making the same trip from Drayton Park Station to Moorgate. Around 300 passengers pile on the train. Frequent commuters will aim for the front carriages, as these will be closest to the exits on arrival. Some board the train a little too late for the good seats and find the first carriage completely full. They must settle for the rear carriages. Just 5 minutes later, the train is approaching Moorgate Station, the end of the line. But something is wrong. Normally, a train will coast for a while to slow its approach to a station before applying the brakes and entering the station at around 15 miles per hour. Newson's train does not cut the power, nor does it apply the brakes. It enters the station at around 40 miles per hour. Commuters on Moorgate's Platform 9 jump back in fright as the train hurtles into the overrun tunnel, plows through the buffer and sand drag, and slams into the tunnel's end wall. The front carriage is crushed into the wall as the second carriage crashes into the back of it, buckling the carriage and forcing the front and rear into the roof. The 52-foot carriage has been crushed to around 20 feet. The second carriage, now crammed under the first, is crushed when the third carriage telescopes into it. The 3 carriages behind the third carriage are comparatively unscathed, and some of these passengers are able to leave the station without even realizing the brutal extent of the damage. It is only later, when they see the news, that they discover they have escaped the most deadly peacetime incident in the Underground's history. Unfortunately, there are still dozens of people trapped in the wreckage of the first few carriages.